kind of jobs are there? Well, there are entry-level jobs, low to mid-level, depending on your level of training. You can start out as a GIS technician. That's a real common job, or someone who does surveying and CAD work. You can move up into a GIS analyst or a geographer. People who use LiDAR, the thing I was talking about with the cars, that's also used for mapping the Earth's surface. Or you could be a cartographer, a map maker. In mid to high level jobs, you get into remote sensing analysts who will use satellite data, and they do all kinds of work with that, or a GIS specialist. And then you get into some management positions, administrators and senior designers. And then the high level jobs, again, senior GIS analyst, people who run, coordinators who run offices of GIS people, project managers, things like that. So lots of different kinds of jobs. And these are just a few, there are many more. Next slide, please. So I put together, I went to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and got some data on what people actually make in these fields. And so some example positions, survey and mapping. This is an entry-level job. With this job, you could get a job like this with just a high school diploma or equivalent. You may not have to have had any experience before, though it always helps to have a little GIS training. But the median pay for that is about $45,000 a year. Next job. I'm sorry, next slide. So a little bit higher up the ladder, a cartographer or a photogrammetrist, which is someone who works with aerial imagery. The median pay for a job like that is around $65,000 a year. And remember, with median, some people make more than that, some people make less than that, but that's sort of the middle range, and depending on where you are. And typically you need a bachelor's degree with that, or some level of certification from industry, which is another option if you aren't going to college. So next slide, please. So another job is a geographer, and those are people who work with maps. They do analysis on maps, and who knew there were actually professional geographers in the world, but there really are, and there are quite a few of them. And they make a fairly decent income. The median pay is about $81,000 a year. And again, depends on where you're at. You could make more or less. And you can start on that path with a bachelor's degree. Some of them have master's degrees and even PhDs, and they tend, the higher your degree level and the more experience tends to be the more you make in those positions. And the next slide. And so a geoscientist is a scientist that actually works with geographic data, or somebody who perhaps works at a research institution. And the median pay for that's about $92,000, and you start on that track with a bachelor's degree. Often they will get higher level degrees as they go on through their career. A master's is not uncommon. So that's a few examples of GIS or geospatial jobs working with GIS technology. Next slide, please. So, the jobs outlook for GIS is really great, because one of the things we know is that this field is it's really exploding. They call it the geospatial revolution. And across all of the industry, there's very large growth. Some areas are low growth, 3 to 5%. Some areas are much, much higher, and we're inventing these jobs all the time. New uses for these technologies are happening all the time. But, the government predicts that they'll be in high demand over the next decade. It's one of the fastest growing job fields. Annual salaries averaging around $70,000. Again, make more or less depending on where you are in that field. And yeah, the industry is currently valued at $270 billion, with around 500,000 people working in it. So it's a big industry, and it's getting bigger all the time. Next slide. Excuse me. Yeah, and so this just touched on what people can make in a year. Again, it's from the data is from the U.S. Department of Bureau of Labor Statistics. But there's a nice blog I listed down here that has a lot of information about geospatial careers and jobs. So, lots of growth in those.